Hey guys, Tapan Sharma here, and I'm back with another tutorial. And in this tutorial, we will be discussing about how we can integrate Khalti Payment Gateway into any Laravel application. So I have opened the documentation of Khalti, and I do have a fresh installation of Laravel as well. And the current version that I'm using is 8.37, but it doesn't really matter which version you are using. It will work on any Laravel version. So talking about the integration, we have mainly two parts. The first part is the integration on the client side, and the second is the integration on the server side. So on the client side, we'll be using JavaScript and buttons on the front end to display to the user about the payment details. And on the server integration, what we'll be doing is we'll be verifying the transaction, and then we'll be again sending the response that we receive from the Khalti server. And so in that case, in that way, we'll be verifying the transaction and our complete transaction process is completed. So in the first part, we'll be doing the client integration. So what we have here is we need to include a script tag. So let me just copy the script part from here. And in our Visual Studio Code, what I'll be doing is I'll just remove all these div classes, and let me also remove the style. So let's keep that simple. And in our head tag, we need to include the script. So I'll just copy and paste that. That's included. And the next step that we'll be doing is let's include the button. So this is the button with the ID of Khalti, payment button, and pay with Khalti. And we also need to include the script tag. So what we can do here is in our welcome.blade, okay, we can actually include the script tag here before the body. And let's copy the whole script part, copy the script part and paste that here. So here what we'll be doing is we need to provide a public key. So this will be provided by Khalti once you become a merchant of Khalti. So you'll get the public key and the private key. So they are in two formats. One is the testing phase and another is the live phase. Once you successfully complete your transaction by using public keys, then Khalti will provide you with the live keys, and then you can actually use that in the production. So for now, we'll be using the public keys. So basically behind the scenes, what I've done is I have in my environment variable, I have defined the secret key and public key for my merchant account. So I have called the secret key and called the public key. So in order to catch this thing, what we need to do is in our config app.php, let's define these variables here. So here what I'll be doing is I'll be defining the secret key and public key for Khalti. So Khalti secret key. So we'll be accessing the secret key and public key using the app config global variable. So Khalti secret key will be using that from the environment variable. So Khalti secret key, and public key will be Khalti public key. So the next step that we'll be doing here in our welcome.blade.php, what we can now do is we can use the config helper function, and inside we have app.khalti. So we need to provide public key here. So this will be the Khalti public key, and the product identity, let's keep it 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 0 for now. Product name Dragon, that's fine. Product URL, you can change that according to your needs. And the payment preference, for now I'm keeping everything. And event handler, so whenever whenever the payment is successful, then we'll be making a payment verification process on this part in here. And if there are any errors, then we'll be seeing that errors on our console. So that's fine. And on the checkout part, so this is assigning the button from our HTML DOM. And then on click, what it is doing is actually using the amount. So for now, what we also need to do is we need to provide a minimum transaction amount must be 10, and we need to provide the amount in paisa. So for if the amount is 10, in amount in paisa will be 1000. So let's keep it 10 rupees for now. And on the client side, that's actually it. So let's go ahead and reload the browser and see whether this is working fine or not. So we have Pay with Khalti. If I click on it, okay, nothing's happening here. Config is not a function. Okay. So we are getting an uncop type error. Config is not a function. So we made a mistake here. We can't actually use this config inside JavaScript. So for that, let's wrap that inside the curly braces, and we also need to wrap this inside double quotations. So now this will actually be converted into the actual public key. So let's save that and go ahead and reload our browser. If I click on Pay with Khalti, then we see this model. Now our client-side integration is working fine. So this is the payment initiation process, which is executed on the client side. And whenever the client makes the payment, then on the event handler, what actually happens is we execute a function. So a function called onSuccess is executed automatically, and then whatever the response the Khalti server sends, we get it on the payload. So once the client initiates the transaction, and if he or she enters the number pin, and if the transaction is completed, then the onSuccess function is executed. So in here, what we can do is we can actually console.log the payload, and let's go ahead and initiate a transaction. So in here, so I'll just initiate the transaction, enter my mobile number and pin number, and once this transaction is completed, I'll be showing the console window later. I'll be right back. So I'm just completed the transaction, and as you can see, since we are console logging this payload, so this is the payload that we get from the Khalti. So we get a unique ID code, we get the token, we get the amount, we get the mobile number, we get the product identity. So whatever we sent on the first stage, we are getting back with some extra information like the token and the amount, and along with the user information as well. So in the next step, what we'll be doing is we'll be verifying the payment. So in order to verify, what we need to do is we have the verification request phase. So we'll be requesting the Khalti server again in the next step, and then along with sending some repeated parameters like token and amount. So we need to send the token that we get on the payload along with the amount in paisa, along with the authorization secret key. The method should be post, and we'll be making the post request to this URL. So for that, let's go ahead to our JavaScript widget, so Khalti widget, and in here, what we want to do is, so for first, since we'll be making a post request, what I've already done is I have included the jQuery. So we'll be using the jQuery to make a post request. So I'm using CDN for now. And in here, what I want to do is I'll be making a post request using Ajax. So for that, let's define the Ajax, and the type is post. The URL will be, so since we are using Laravel, we can actually use the route here. So route, and let's define a new URL called Khalti.verify payment. So we haven't defined this route yet, so we'll be defining this route in a moment. And we also need to send some data. So the data will be sending in form of object. Inside data, we need to send multiple parameters. Among them, One is the amount, which is 1000 for now. So if you are using it in real life app, and you need to actually get this amount from the database and place that here. So you can actually use the Laravel code like this. So this will get converted to the actual amount, but in my case I'm just using the dummy data. And the next is the token. So in this case the token is payload dot token, and we also need to send another additional parameter, that is the CSRF token. So that is named as underscore token in Laravel. And the way we send the token in Laravel is by defining the CSRF underscore token. So let's save that. And now let's go ahead and define this Khalti.verify payment route. And okay, let's go to the web.php and define a post route. So that will be /Khalti/payment/verify, since we are verifying the payment. And behind the scenes, what I've already done is I've defined a controller called payment controller. So the way we call the controller in Laravel is by calling the payment controller class, and in here we want to go to the verify payment function. So let's go ahead to our payment controller and define that. Okay, one more thing that I missed here is we also need the name, otherwise route won't be recognized. So the name is Khalti.verify payment, and in here we need a function that is verify payment. So here what we'll be doing is, since we are sending two parameters, that is amount and token, we don't need the CSRF token. This will be used by the Laravel framework. So we'll be using these two parameters, that is the amount and token, since we need to send these again to our Khalti server for verification. Since as you can see, we are using the PHP, we'll be using the PHP code to make a post request to this route on the verification part. So the general idea here is, so since we are making an AJAX request, so this AJAX request will make a post request to this verify payment, which will eventually go to this controller, and in here from this controller will now make all the verification requests from here. So that is the general idea. So now in our payment controller, we need to use the request as well to get the amount and the token. So the way we get the amount is by the request amount, and for the token we'll be using the request token. And the way I'm using the amount and token is because I'm using the value pair here. So data, inside data I'm sending amount and token, so the name that I'm using here should be equal to the name used with the request. So these two should be matched. And now the next step that we'll be doing is we'll be using this PHP code to make a post request to this URL. Okay, so now let's go ahead in our controller, paste this code, and we'll be replacing this with the actual token, and the amount for now is 1000 as we know, and we'll be making a post request to this URL and the test secret key. So we need the test secret key here. So let's go ahead and also define the test secret key. So in this case we can use the config app.khalti secret key, and we can actually append it here. So we need to use double quotations in order to use PHP variables. So here what we can do is we have the name as test secret key. So everything should work fine now. And here, as you can see the flow, we are making a post request to this URL. So once this request is made, we'll be getting the response here. So we have this response, and we also have the status code, and at the end let's return the response, and this response is received in our this AJAX function. So here we can define a function called success. So whenever that request is success, then we'll be executing a function which receives a response. And let's console.log this response. And in case if there is any error, then what we want to do is let's also console.log the error. So now again, let's go ahead to our browser and reload and test this thing. Okay, we have an error here after argument missing. So what is that? Okay, we actually need to wrap this thing inside an object. So that was the error here. So let's go ahead and define an object and then paste that. And again, reload the browser. Okay, another error that is on the URL. Okay, we made a mistake. So we need to wrap this inside double quotations. And okay, everything should now work fine. Okay, this looks good. Inside console, there's no errors. Now let's go ahead and pay with Khalti. So there's a problem with this. I'll just remove this whole part and reload. And I'll just make a transaction and be right back. So once we initiate and complete the transaction, and then the first part is we are console logging the payload, as you can see on the first step. So here, once we make a post request to Khalti.verify payment, okay, this is the on success. This console.log, and on the second part, so this gets executed first, and then we make a post request to this URL. And again, on the Khalti.verify payment, what we are doing is we are making a post request to the Khalti server, which gets executed. So in here, we are getting the amount and the token from our request that we send through the data, and then we are making a post request along with these data to this URL. And when this gets executed, we are returning that response. So this is the response that we return from here. And so this request gets successful, and then we return the response, and that response gets received in here. So we are console logging this response. So this is the response that we see on the front end. So now the next step that we'll be doing is, since our transaction was completed successfully, we could actually make another request to our own server to actually store the data in the database. So for that, let's define another Ajax request. The only thing left here is we need to store the data to our database. So in here, what I'll be doing is I'll be making a post request, and the URL will be, we need to wrap this inside double quotations. So that will be route. So let's define a route called Khalti.store payment. So we are storing the payment to the database. And let's also send the data. We don't really need to send the data here, but we could actually store the response that we get from the server and store that in the form of JSON in our database. So here what we'll be doing is I'll just send the response, and we also need to pass in the token. So that is the CSRF token. So CSRF underscore token. So this will work fine. And if this is successful, then what we can actually do is let's console. So in here, we can actually redirect a user to another page or show a flash message that the transaction was successful or something like that. So here I'll just write transaction successful. So let's save that, and we haven't defined the store payment route yet. So I'll just copy this part, and in our web.php, I'll make a post request to Khalti /payment /store, which will go to payment controller class and on the store payment function. And we also need the name So that is Khalti.store payment. So let's save that and go to our payment controller and define a function called store payment. So we'll be getting the request here. So the thing that we'll be implementing here is to store the data to the database, and we also get the request response here, so you can actually store that as a form of JSON, in the form of JSON. And then in here what we can actually do is we can return a response, a JSON response with the status of 200 or something like that. And if the status is 200, then depending on that, what we could actually do here is, okay, inside, okay, this transaction is successful, so we send a post request to Khalti.store payment. We store the data to our database, and then if the request is successful, then we are console logging the transaction successful message. So this is the complete flow of how you implement Khalti payment gateway in a Laravel application, and this would be kind of similar to other apps as well. It's only the syntax that is different. The flow would be same. So now one last time, let's go ahead and check this. So in my browser, let's go ahead and reload. So I'll just initiate a new transaction again. So as you can see here, our transaction is successful. So this is the complete flow of implementing Khalti payment gateway in any Laravel application. You can do the same for other programming language as well. And I'll be posting another video in Nepali as well. So if you want it in Nepali, stay tuned. I'll be uploading that as well. And if you like the content, do subscribe to the channel to stay updated about the future releases. So this much for today's video, and if you like the content, do subscribe to the channel to stay updated, and have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.